Well, Dan Lanning continues to keep the mood quite high around the program, but still has work to do. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. If you haven't already, comment, subscribe, please, and thank you wherever you listen to or watch this show. We got one question to answer. We got more mailbag questions to answer on today's show. Tons to get to. First, got to shout out Oregon baseball, by the way. Pac-12 tournament champions, knocking off Arizona 5-4 over the weekend. They're the number 2 seed in the Nashville Regional, hosted by number 6 team in the country, Vanderbilt. That starts this Friday, I believe, and I am pretty stoked to watch that. Love college baseball, love college softball. Oregon softball got out of the Fayetteville Regional in thrilling fashion, ran into a buzzsaw in Oklahoma State, unfortunately. But we're here today to talk about some football. So Dan Lanning right now has got Oregon's momentum about as high as it could possibly be. You've got a top 6 recruiting class in the 2024 cycle. You just pulled in a top 10 class, both in the transfer portal and in the high school ranks, and you've got Oregon in good position there. Oregon's got the highest, or tied for the highest rather, with Washington and USC over-under win total in Las Vegas in 2023. And everyone's asking the question right now, when are more big-time recruits going to commit to Oregon? And is next year's class going to be the best in program history? If you're looking for just a generic vibe check around the program, it's pretty darn high right now. It's hard to imagine at this point in time, barring superior results a season ago, how it could be much higher. And even that is still a solid place to be, though not great. And that's kind of what I wanted to touch on. Is all this momentum and everything is fantastic. I enjoy it. You should enjoy it. It raises the ceiling on your program on our program to recruit at this level. And it gets us into the conversation in a way that we want to be nationally. And then we need to be just from a player talent standpoint. But the next hurdle that Lanning has to clear is the on-field results have to be there. Season 1 was, I won't say a total disappointment. The end was a disappointment. Game 1 was a disappointment. But everything else that happened, the bowl game performance, which, by the way, if you want to feel optimistic about the defense and guys getting better and such, allowed just 6 points in the second half against an NFL quarterback and an NFL wide receiver. Just saying. Then you upgrade the personnel. Might be a little bit of optimism as to whether or not they can make a big jump this year. Something to remember. But if that's going to happen outside of just the defense and the overall team is going to have a better season, get back to the Pac-12 championship game, maybe win it, maybe get to the college football playoff. That is the next step. All this stuff is really, really good. It's something that you need to be able to do if Oregon's going to reach its goals as a program. You have to be able to recruit at a high level. You got to stay relevant. You got to keep the brand out there. You got to be able to bring in players. And they've got a bunch of great visitors lined up for this summer. And there's still a lot more talented recruits out there that Oregon can go after. And all of it is great. But the next step is to deliver those on-field results, more than just having a 10-win season, right? It's about playing for conference championships, being in the mix, which we were, by the way. It's really easy to forget because the end of the regular season left a bitter, sour, terrible, no good, very bad taste in our mouths, losing to our 2 biggest rivals in a 3-week stretch in heartbreaking fashion. But also remember that before that took place, Oregon was right there in the college football playoff. We were in the mix, had a path to control our own destiny. Now, if you want to capitalize on this momentum in the biggest way possible, if you're Dan Lanning, you've got to be able to take that next step forward. And I'm so very excited for that to happen and to have real football to talk about once again. Because, I am interested by the transfer portal and I like talking about rosters and all this sort of stuff, but we're less than 100 days away to college football. Does everybody get that? Just going to let that simmer and marinate for just a moment. We are less than 100 days away to college football. So here's what I recommend. Go out and have the best summer you possibly can, because you know what they say, time flies when you're having fun. So if that time flies, then before you know it, football will actually be here. And then before you know it, we'll have games to talk about, and we'll see how Dan Lanning and this staff can translate all these off-season victories into in-season victories. Because generally, you have to have one before you have the other. But just because you have one, off-season victories, doesn't mean you're going to have the other, in-season victories. So that's kind of how I feel about Oregon big picture right now. Is I love what's happening. I don't know that it could be going that much better at this point in time on the recruiting front and the momentum that is generating in the college football world. But I am not, expecting, or yeah, no, I'm not expecting, but rather hoping that translates to superior in-season results this year. Talk about that more a bit on tomorrow's show. But a quick note here, speaking of recruiting, Oregon got a 2025 three-star interior offensive line commit, because why not? I mean, like, the concept of recruiting is kind of crazy. It's kind of awesome, but it's kind of crazy. But the fact that they're already in that space just goes to show you they got teams of people, teams of staff members whose job it is to find, evaluate, and locate that sort of talent, and then offer scholarships accordingly. And the fact that we've got 2025 commits, great. Not worried about it right now. Not going to go into that sort of stuff because it's a long ways away. Our focus should be on the 2023 season, 2024 recruiting class. That's where we're at in the cycle at this point in time. We're also in the position battle cycle because we've reached the end of spring football. And this question came in from Eric. Remember, you can always be a part of the mailbag. By all means, YouTube comments or Twitter, hit me up at smalls_55 or at Locked On Ducks. DMs and mentions are wide open. Eric asks, why are you so confident Traeshon Holden starts at Z? That'd be the receiver spot opposite Troy Franklin, instead of Gary Bryant Jr. or Chris Hudson. Is size there essential? Because you would think Gary Bryant and Chris will get plenty of reps outside of the slot position. So I think Eric brings up a really good point here, which is that Chris Hudson, when we think of him because of his body type as a slot guy, if you go look at the snaps that he has taken at Oregon over the last 3 seasons, this upcoming one will be his 4th in Eugene, he has taken plenty of reps on the outside. It has not been exclusively a slot position thing here, but the reason I'd say Holden is looking like your starting Z receiver here is because of the body type that he does present and the caliber of school that he came over from. When you bring over someone who was a 4-star recruit before going to Alabama and grades as a 4-star transfer coming over from Alabama, and you have a wide receiver room that has one surefire starter from a season ago, but you lost, your 2 Z receivers there in Chase Cota and Dante Thornton. That to me, the earliness, timing, I think timing is probably the better word. The early nature of when he committed to me indicates that they had their eyes set on him, and he's someone you should expect to play pretty soon. So if not me, I do expect him to play immediately, and I expect him to start. Now, how involved he is in the offense, that will depend on, how well he and Bo Nix can develop their chemistry, what what a given game is like, how often they're throwing the ball. I mean, maybe it's, like the Washington game where you're throwing the ball a decent amount, but also sometimes you just have to do the Mario Cristobal approach, line up and run the ball right down their throats. I've got some more thoughts on this and then plenty more questions to get to. Mailbag is absolutely positively jam-packed today. But the other thing that's jam-packed, my stomach when I eat Built Bars. I know, they are. Every single time. Golf bag, pantry, always there. The few times I go on a hike, Built Bar is the snack of choice because they're delicious, but they don't have all the sugar and calories. They're the best tasting protein bar ever. Go get Built Bars. You got to try them. They're healthy, taste amazing, covered in 100% real dark chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. Bunch of great flavors. Mint brownie is my personal favorite. They've got churro, peanut butter brownie, cookies and cream. You can get specialty flavors at built.com. You can get a box of 4 in the pharmacy section at Walmart, or you can get a 13-bar box at Sam's Club. So that's built.com, Walmart, Sam's Club. Go get your next order of the best tasting protein bars ever that be built. Do so, and when you do, you can thank me later. Okay, so the Z receiver position is one that was primarily occupied by Chase Cota a year ago, but Dante Thornton played there when Chase Cota went down with an injury, which is why depth is so essential, right? That was a big reason Oregon's offense was able to continue to have success. Cota was out, Thornton stepped in, and there was no production drop off. Thornton had a tremendous couple of games. He was huge in the Utah game. He was big in the Washington game. Like, he had really, really good. That Utah game specifically, I think he had like 145 yards or so, 150, whatever it was. He was big, and you've got to be able to have that sort of depth and not have a huge drop off when a guy does go down, because it's football. It's just going to inevitably happen there. But I think Cota is a great example. You know, he is closer to Chris Hudson than we all might think, because Hudson is smaller, right? He has that prototypical slot receiver body type. But Chase Cota last year lined up in the slot all the time. He lined up out wide more often, I believe, but it was not uncommon for him to be on the interior. So Traeshon Holden may be your number one receiver. And this will come back, number one Z receiver, that is. Franklin's your number one receiver. Everybody knows that. So Franklin comes back and is your starter there, but Holden may line up on your first formation, and the first offensive snap of the year, September 2nd against Portland State, and he's the only other receiver that's out there. That may be the case, but it doesn't mean that we'll never see Chris Hudson out there, right? For all the talk, and I've been a part of this as well, because I do believe it's a semi-legitimate position battle about, is it going to be Chris Hudson? Is it going to be Tez Johnson in the slot? My guess is it's closer to 50-50, because Hudson's been really good and productive and is the better blocker of the two. Johnson is the faster of the two. And it is, again, a caliber of transfer you don't bring in unless you think there's a legitimate role for him within the offense here. But, with the way that they've brought in tight end transfers, right, with Casey Kelley coming in from Ole Miss, and then I am literally blanking, and I have it written down somewhere. So just give me a quick moment here. Kaden Ludwick. Why did that name just go? Yeah, Kaden Ludwick. Sorry, I was making sure that I had that right. That was just like what my old history teacher in high school, Mr. Noble, my favorite teacher in high school, would call a moment of cerebral flatulence. That's what that was, or a brain fart if you prefer. So I think that Holden starts there because of his size, athleticism, and profile, but it doesn't mean that he's the only guy that's ever going to play out there. I think you could have 3 receiver sets depending on how Will Stein wants to mix and match personnel with Troy Franklin, with Chris Hudson, and Tez Johnson. You could see Troy Franklin, you could see Traeshon Holden, and you could see Gary Bryant Jr. out there. There are also all sorts of different combinations that you can employ, and it comes down to how Will Stein wants to mix and match personnel, how he views the strengths, longest one-syllable word in the English language, by the way, and weaknesses of each individual player, given what he's trying to do offensively in a given situation, right? So if you're going to go, down in the red zone and you have a 3 receiver set, you might lean towards Troy Franklin, Traeshon Holden, and probably Gary Bryant Jr. Because in the red zone, sometimes you got to body a guy up. You got to be able to throw a jump ball, right? That might be the case. But if they feel that Tez Johnson has better catch and run ability than Traeshon Holden, then when they're in the middle of the field, maybe they'll put Tez out there more often. Or if they feel that Gary Bryant Jr. is better in that sort of situation, something he's very good at, right? He's big in the kick and punt return game, might be a part of that for the Ducks special teams as well. That could be what Will Stein looks at and says, okay, I want these guys on the field. And I think Oregon's bringing in all these options so that they can have options, right? They don't want to be pigeonholed into, well, we got to play these guys because we don't have anybody else who's sufficiently talented at that spot. I think they're looking at it and saying, okay, these guys can do this, and that allows us to do more elements with our offense, right? They might go entirely small, right? Maybe they want the quickest, most nimble guys possible out there on the field, and it's Gary Bryant Jr., Chris Hudson, and Tez Johnson. That could be a 3 receiver set if, maybe Troy Franklin needs to take a play off or something like that. So I think that's how it factors in. But I do think that at that position, typically you see bigger bodied guys. Chase Cota is about 6'6'1". Dante Thornton was 6'5". So that's clearly something that Lanning and at least Dillingham, we'll see if Stein is the same, value at that Z position. But it doesn't mean he's the only guy that you're going to see out there in a meaningful way this season. But good question, Eric. This one comes in from Tanya. Mailbag question. What do you think is the most underrated position on a football team? And how do you think the Ducks personnel in that position stack up? I'm going to cheat a little bit on this question, and I'm going to say interior offensive line, because they all kind of work together. And then the tackles, like the entire offensive line is working together at some level. But the communication required between guard, center, guard, I would argue is greater than what you have at the tackle positions, because typically if a defense is going to run a stunt, that requires the ability to pass off blitzers and know your assignments and understand what needs to happen, most notably from your interior offensive line, because that's who can get confused, right? Is a center might crash over to, an angling defensive lineman, and that creates a hole, and then a defensive end loops around and comes through, right? That is the most essential combination that I think goes really underrated here. And the other thing is offensive tackles are the most likely players to be left on an island where they're one-on-one with an edge player, and it's a matter of whether you get tight end or running back help. You might not. But, when you're rushing, unless you've got an all-out blitz, obviously, guard, center, guard, they're working together in tandem, I think, more often, because you have to protect up the middle or inside before you protect the outside, right? So like if a tackle or a guard has got two blitzers coming, you're always taught you take the inside guy. So I think that's the most underrated part. The offensive line in general could be the answer here, but I think with passing being such a big part of the game of football now, left tackle and right tackle, I guess, for those few left-handed quarterbacks out there, but even for the righties, like a tackle is so essential. I think that's a pretty well-known, position of importance for every football team, more than the interior there. So that brings us to the second part, is how do you think the Ducks stack up? At center, you're looking at probably Jackson Powers Johnson and Marcus Harper, likely his backup. I think Marcus Harper is destined to become Ryan Walk or like a Dawson Jaramillo type. Can start at any point in time, might not always be the full-time starter, good enough to be a full-time starter, but has got that positional versatility. I think he can play right guard, he can play left guard, and from what we've heard, he can rotate in at center as well, and that's what Ryan Walk was able to do. When Forsythe was out for games a year ago, there was no drop-off in the offensive line. You put JPJ in at guard, and you had Ryan Walk at center, and Harper was in there as well, along with Stephen Jones. So the guards right now, along with Jackson Powers Johnson / Marcus Harper at center, are Junior Angelau, the Texas transfer, Stephen Jones, 6th-year returner, Nishad Strother, the East Carolina transfer, just came in, Davey Uli, former 4-star offensive line recruit out of Puyallup in Washington, and then Marcus Harper as well at the guard position there. So I feel good about the depth, and I feel good about the talent as well. I feel better about the depth than the talent, I would say, just because guys are going to be in kind of new roles, right? If Harper were to win a starting left guard job, for instance, that wouldn't be new for him. But Jackson Powers Johnson, likely our starting center, is learning a new position, right? Like he was, under the tutelage of Alex Forsythe and Ryan Walk the last couple of years, outstanding dudes from the offensive line standpoint to learn from. So I'm not worried about whether or not he can become that. But regardless of how well he was taught or how talented he is, and we know how talented he is, PFF has him graded as the highest returning or the highest graded returning offensive guard in all of college football. He's not going to be playing guard anymore. He's going to be playing center. So I think there's a little bit of an adjustment to expect there, but I feel good about that. And then the guards, I think you just have so many options here that, Stephen Jones, 6th-year guy, solid pass blocker, beast as a run blocker. Junior Angelau was a good player at Texas on the interior of the offensive line. Nishad Strother was East Carolina's highest graded offensive lineman on PFF a season ago. We know what Marcus Harper can do. Anytime he came in and had to start a season ago, there was no drop off from the first unit. And that's what, I think the really great teams are able to do at more than just the offensive line, but definitely on the offensive line all the time, is when one guy goes down, you got to be able to fill that with, a player of equal or at least comparable talent. And I think Oregon's got that right now. So I feel good about the interior of the offensive line. I feel really good about Josh Connerly. I think there will be some adjustment overall. And we'll see how a Johnny Cornelius, a highly coveted transfer from Rhode Island, the FCS ranks, stacks up at right tackle. Because that's kind of how it's looking at the offensive line positions right now. But on the interior, I think we're okay. Sam Jett, more than okay, above average for sure. Sam Jett asks, so glad you brought up Chris Hudson's blocking. Getting back to the wide receivers here. He's not the biggest man, but he pushes DBs around, and I love watching him block. And just an idea, Spencer, but what if they moved Kasper to tight end just to get him on the field and they split him out or something? What do you think? I'd say prior to the Kelley and Ludwick transfer additions, this would be more likely. Now, Ludwick is a preferred walk-on, and Kelley is not coming over from Ole Miss, but Ludwick is coming over from Colorado. So I don't think they're expecting a ton from him there. I think what they're doing with Ludwick is, look, we like a guy who's semi-proven in the room. We feel like he could be a scholarship caliber player next year, but if they're not offering him a scholarship spot, and maybe they will, right? Maybe he's a preferred walk-on right now, and they're going to give him, a scholarship slot if they have one remaining, or if they feel like one is going to open up. Not sure how that's going to play out, but they might just feel okay with what they have in Kenyon Sadiq. And they might look at Sadiq and say, look, yeah, Ludwig's got him on experience barely. He didn't go into a game. He redshirted a year ago at Colorado. At least I'm pretty sure he didn't go into a game, but regardless, he hasn't really played very much. And Sadiq, a high floor freshman at the position, they might feel like either one of those guys, let them battle it out and see who's going to be the best number 4 tight end. And Oregon did use 4 tight ends a year ago. They could again this season. But I think Kasper doing that could have worked if they'd wanted to. But I don't think they feel like they need to anymore with those 2 additions. And they also might not want to, because Kasper is a really promising wide receiver. Like, I'm super high on him. Super, super high on him. I really hope he sticks around, because after Troy Franklin goes to the NFL, which will be after this season, there's going to be a void for Oregon's ex-receiver position. And yeah, it could be Gary Bryant. Yeah, it could be Jurion Dickey, but it could also be Kyler Kasper, who was a highly rated recruit, looks really fast, good hands, had some great moments during the spring game. I still like his upside a lot, and I hope he, sees enough of a role this year to avoid putting his name into the portal to try and find a bigger one, because I really think that he can be a Troy Franklin type receiver. I think he's that sort of body type. He's that sort of athlete. He has all that potential. He's just got to put it together and get the opportunities. But in theory, yeah, I think what you're going with here, Sam, is a valid thought that if he bulked up at 6'5", yeah, he could be a tight end, right? A lot of tight ends played receiver in high school. Kenyon Sadiq did. Terrence Ferguson did. You just got to put on some weight, and Kyle Pitts, same sort of thing. He could be that sort of guy. But I think with those transfers coming in and the role that they're going to play, I think he's best suited to stay at wide receiver. Last thing, this question from Bud Everts, just kind of a fun question to end today's show. If you could do a TED Talk, what would you enjoy talking about? This is an easy one. Usually you all send me questions and I think about it, maybe do some prep on it, type out some thoughts, think about some thoughts, let them marinate for a little while, see how I think. This is an easy one. What would I do a TED Talk on? Why the 12-team college football playoff tears at the very fabric of what makes this sport so very special. Signed, sealed, delivered. I would absolutely do it. And I'd see if I could get Josh Pate to be my wingman there. Appreciate everyone listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Back tomorrow. And until then, go Ducks.